What's up, everybody? Welcome in A to Z Sports DocTalk back for another segment because we have another significant Titans injury to discuss as the reports came out about Titans rookie wide receiver Treylon Burks and the turf toe that he sustained in the game last Sunday against the Indianapolis Colts in Lucas Oil Stadium. A to Z Sports DocTalk. I'm Austin Stanley, joined here with Ronald Durr, Dr. Ronald Durr, who is the foot and ankle specialist at the Bone and Joint Institute, which is where you guys should turn if you ever have an injury in life and sports and whatever it might look like. They have the experts there at the Bone and Joint Institute in Franklin to help you out, get you right back to health with the rehab facility and all the other resources you might need. So, Dr. Durr, thanks for jumping back on here. I know back in the spring we talked about UC Saros and a high ankle sprain. So here we are talking turf toe. So thanks for jumping on today.
Yeah, glad to be here, Austin.
Absolutely. So just before we dive in here, the official report that came out from Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network is the fact that Treylon Burks did have a turf toe. This reported by them earlier this week. Turf toe on that foot there against the Indianapolis Colts. So diagnosed there, sources per sources. No surgery necessary, just rehab, but Burks will miss some time. And so, Dr. Durr, we know that Treylon Burks did not practice on Wednesday. We have not seen if he was out there on today, Thursday or not, but not expecting him to play this Sunday in Washington before the Titans bye week. But let's start from the very beginning in this with when it comes to turf toe. What exactly is turf toe? And if you could take us through that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And just so all the listeners know too, Austin, I don't treat Treylon Burks. I haven't actually seen him or laid hands on him, but this is all just from reports that we're basing all this follow-up on. But a turf toe is basically a sprain of the big toe, the joint at the base of your big toe. And if you can see this little model here, your ankle's back here, your forefoot out here, your big toe. But a turf toe is basically taking your big toe joint and hyperextending it or bringing it toward the nail or up a lot further than it's supposed to go. It's a common injury you'll see in football because when a player gets his foot planted or somebody lands on the back of his heel, if his foot's resting on the ground, that toe gets taken through a range of motion that's way beyond its comfort level, and the ligaments, which connect bone to bone, get sprained or stretched out. And turf toe got its name basically from playing on artificial turf. But way back with the Astrodome, that's where you started seeing these kind of injuries. The reason they occur a little more easily on a turf field is because the shoes the players are wearing are a lot more flexible. Their cleats are kind of molded into the sole of their foot instead of being screwed into a plate like they would on a grass field. And so the shoe is a lot more flexible, and it gives that toe a lot more opportunity to get taken through a range of motion it's not ready for.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was something I was going to ask you about the playing surface, because I feel like Lucas Oil Stadium there in Indianapolis does have a bad reputation for some injuries, because Titans fans know that's the same turf that Derrick Henry broke his foot and had the Jones fracture surgery on. Jamison Williams, who's now a rookie wide receiver with the Lions, tore his ACL on that turf back when he was playing with Alabama this past football season as well. Have you seen where like a certain field can have some issues like that? Is that a valid thing that happens, or is that just three football injuries that just happen to happen on the same field?
I think their players are a little more at risk on a surface like that. Not that that was the only reason, but you get a lot more grip with your shoes on a turf field a lot of times because it's not slippery or wet. Two, the shoe is a lot more flexible, and so it presents an opportunity for the joints to be taken through motion beyond their limits. And sometimes the surface is just a little less forgiving. And so all those three, and then sometimes it's just bad luck. If you have your foot resting on the ground and a player falls in behind you or comes down on the back of your foot, that forces a toe into extension. That can happen on grass as easily as turf.
Right. And if you go back and look at the play, it looks like that's what happened with Burks, is somebody landed on his heel, which probably drove that toe
exactly
into the ground. So the next thing I wanted to get to is the report that no surgery was needed. So take us through. And actually, I do need to give a shout out, because the reason why we're doing this is because Karen on Twitter asked, hey, can we do a DocTalk segment about turf toe with the Bone and Joint Institute and find out if there are different grades of turf toe? So that's Karen's initial question. Are there different grades of it? And take us through those different levels.
Yeah, there are grades. So we grade a turf toe injury, a grade 1, a grade 2, and a grade 3, 1 being the mildest, 3 being the most severe. Grade 1 is where you stretch the ligaments, but you don't really tear them. 2, you have a little more injury and some tearing of the ligaments, but the joint is still nice and stable, but just more injured. And then a grade 3, a lot of times you're actually tearing the ligaments completely. You could even fracture a bone. The toe could be dislocated. 3s are obviously really severe injuries. It doesn't sound like, from what we hear, that Treylon had that type of injury. Even a grade 1 may keep you out of play for a week or 2 or 3. Grade 2s maybe 3 to 6 weeks, depending on how quickly they respond to therapy and treatment. But it sounds like his was a more mild 1 or 2 type of injury.
Yeah, because it sounds like from the reports from NFL Network that no surgery needed. So I'm guessing for you, surgery is when that ligament does tear.
Yeah, it tears the tissue on the bottom side of the toe that holds that toe together. Sometimes the small bones underneath the toe, called the sesamoid bones, can be fractured. That tissue, if it pulls away, has to be repaired back to the base of the bone of your toe to make it stay in the right position. But that's a major injury.
Yeah, and Harry, we'll clear this up again. Harry says, "What's Treylon's grade?" There is no, we don't know what Treylon Burks' grade.
Correct.
Dr. Durr has not worked specifically on Treylon Burks, but we do know the reference from Ian Rappaport where no surgery needed. Hopefully means, for the Titans' sake and for Titans fans, that is either a grade 1 or grade 2 type of injury. And Bobby asked, can you ask and talk about the turf versus grass? We did hit on that, Bobby. So after we're done here, you can go back on the replay and catch up with Donald Durr's opinions and conversation about what makes turf different compared to grass. So if it's a 1 or 2 grade and no surgery is needed, I was curious going into this because I was like, what like physical therapy could you do for a turf toe? So what are some things that an athlete would do and try to get themselves back with that injury?
So the first thing you do is put the player in a boot. The boot basically prevents the toe from having to move. You can walk on it, but rest it at the same time. So I think I heard that even after he came out of the locker room after that injury, he had a boot on, which is appropriate.
And crutches. Boot and crutches.
So you just have to let pain kind of be your guide. Even in the boot, it can be tender. Ice is, the typical injuries, treatment for a sprain or rest ice, compression, elevation. So they call it the RICE therapy. Therapy-wise, you can do some ultrasound, or we call it ionto or phonophoresis, are called modalities, trying to minimize swelling, milking down the toe with a little compression. Taping, the best thing you do in therapy is as you start to rehab and recover, you tape the toe so it can't extend as much. You tape it down so it tries to limit the extension and try to minimize recurrent injury to the toe. And then as you progress back to a shoe, a lot of times we're putting a stiffening device in the shoe called a turf toe insert. Basically, it's trying to stiffen the toe of the shoe and minimize some of the motion of the big toe.
So when you're taping it down, are you just taping it to the toe next to it to keep it there? Or
you're kind of taping it. I always tell people it's kind of like that cancer ribbon appearance. It has a circle and a flare underneath, but you're taping it to the bottom of the foot and trying to minimize the ability for that toe to extend. So kind of like this, you kind of tape it down so it's hard for it to come up.
Interesting. A to Z Sports here. DocTalk segment with Dr. Ronald Durr of the Bone and Joint Institute, foot and ankle specialist, talking about turf toe as it's been reported. Treylon Burks, Titans rookie wide receiver, having turf toe. So go through quickly again. We don't think there's surgery that's needed for Treylon Burks. He did not practice today. So for grades 1 and grades 2, what's the estimated time length of recovery that you mentioned a couple minutes ago?
Yeah, so for the milder sprains, it may only be a week or 2, and the more severe sprain, like a 2, it could be up to 4 to 6 weeks or 3 to 6 weeks. It really, turf toe is a very painful injury, even at a milder grade, and so it's kind of tell people it's kind of like a hamstring injury. Even though it can be healing up, it's always at risk of being re-aggravated or re-injured. it can be difficult for a player to, even if the pain subsides, get their strength and confidence back in a cut or a turn. So a lot of that depends on how quickly he gets confidence, how quickly he gets the stability and comfort that he needs. And that will kind of determine how quickly he's back on the field.
And that was something I wanted to ask you too, because sometimes injuries, you have them and it's more of a pain management, but you think it could affect the actual ability of the athlete to make these cuts and make these moves if it's not fully healed?
Yeah, because there's such a demand on your big toe. Your big toe is a stabilizer for your balance. It's stabilizer for strength. It's a major force in your foot for pushing off and making a cut. And so it really depends on how comfortable he is. I mean, they'll use ways of trying to minimize some of that, but not cancel it out, because you need that kind of that feedback sensation to tell you if you're doing too much or too little. But yeah, it can definitely linger for a while longer than people would think, and it can actually affect performance and for a while until he gets more confident with it.
Yeah, and Bobby asks, what about worsening the injury by playing? Assume yes, that you could worsen that by trying to play through it.
Yeah, like I said, kind of like a hamstring injury. You got to be cautious, come back in short bits at first, prove to yourself that it's going to be something that allows you to play at the level you need to play at comfortably and confidently. But yeah, it's always kind of the same injury can take longer for one person to heal than another. So it's all individualized treatment.
If it does get worse, what are some ways that playing through turf toe could get worse? Is it just worsening the same injury, or could there be other injuries that come from it?
Well, if the other injuries that could occur, if you're compensating for your foot, you could be a little bit more likely to injure something else or compensate. You may not be, protecting yourself as well as you could in order to protect your foot. But typically you're going to let the pain kind of be your guide and let it kind of tell you if you can play at the level you need to play at. Sometimes it's a game day decision. Sometimes it's playing part of a game, but not the whole game, and kind of working yourself into a level of playing that you're comfortable with and tolerating. It may be a injury that kind of nags him for a while, but if he can play and play through it and he's not making it worse, then it's a week by week kind of decision.
Yeah, and I guess let's just, hypothetically, if Burks misses the next 3 weeks and there's a bye week in there and he comes back, is this something that he's probably going to deal with throughout the rest of the season, and where he needs the whole off season for it to fully get back? Or is this something where it heals and most of the time it heals and you feel much better?
Well, I think if he can get off to a good start of healing and has a little more time on the front end, it'll probably minimize his downtime on the back end.
I got you. Makes sense. Makes sense. And as far as this, because Treylon Burks, whenever you talk about him this past summer, conditioning was always a big conversation. Is if Treylon Burks is going to be in a boot for the next little bit, and what are some ways that an athlete like a wide receiver can try to keep their cardio conditioning up to a high level to where they don't have to get back into game shape once their toe feels better?
Yeah, so even at this point in a boot, he could be riding a stationary bike or getting in a pool and kind of running in the water, or doing things to maintain his cardiovascular conditioning without creating new injury to his toe or aggravating his toe. But we can cross-train and do a lot of activities that won't aggravate his foot, but still maintain his conditioning.
Great stuff. We always learn a lot when we talk to anybody at the Bone and Joint Institute. So Dr. Durr, foot and ankle specialist there at the Bone and Joint Institute. If you get hurt in any type of way, whether it's playing sports, your kids playing sports, or just walking on the steps, or however it looks, injuries happen in life. And the people at the Bone and Joint Institute are always there to take care of you. Dr. Durr, thanks again for the time, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. And thanks for jumping on short notice.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow morning on A to Z Sports, and Buck Rising will be live tonight at A to Z Sports Primetime. We'll see you then. Thanks as always.